In May 2009, I had just ended a relationship with my girlfriend of almost 3 years. During our time together, we had moved from Vancouver to Montreal. Even after the breakup, we were still living together because we didn't know many people in the new city. So when a friend from work suggested we go on a weekend camping and fishing trip, I agreed. He grew up in a place called Dunmore, about an hour outside of Montreal. It's a really beautiful area with lots of green forests, farms, and small rivers. We decided to camp and fish along a creek called Silver Stream Creek. It's near some wetlands, and people say the fishing there is really good. We set up our camp in what was probably a farmer's field, so we were likely trespassing next to a beautiful forest. There we spent the evening fishing, chatting, and drinking. As it got darker, we made a small fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. Overall, it was a really nice night. We went to bed just after midnight, sharing a tent. My friend fell asleep before me, and I stayed up playing on my phone until about 1:30. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is waking up to a high-pitched yipping noise. I was a bit groggy, and it took me a moment to fully wake up. The yipping noise kept going and sounded like a strange coyote. I listened for a moment, then started playing on my phone again, as the sound was really annoying. I tried to ignore it, but it seemed to be getting closer. Eventually, it sounded like it was only about 10 feet from the tent. At this point, I was starting to feel a bit uneasy. I had seen coyotes in Vancouver before, and always thought they were pretty harmless. They usually look about the size of a small dog. But as I lay there, I started to worry. What if this one was rabid or smelled the food we had in the tent? My mind started racing, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. I have pretty bad anxiety, so it's easy for me to get caught up in these kinds of thoughts. I nudged my friend to see if he was awake, and he was. The strange noise had woken him up too. We talked about what to do about the coyote since we hadn't brought anything to scare it away. Finally, my friend decided to shine the flashlight at it and shout loudly, hoping to scare it off. He unzipped the tent, and I watched as he pointed the flashlight into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His legs suddenly went wobbly, and he stumbled backward into the tent. He had a shocked look on his face and kept mumbling, "It's not a coyote. It's a person. It's some weird person." Normally, I'd think he was just messing with me, but he looked genuinely terrified. I never want to see that look on someone's face again. He was so shocked and scared that I knew he wasn't kidding. The weird yipping and howling noises kept going. Looking back, it really didn't sound like a coyote. I guess in our groggy state, our brains were trying to make sense of the strange sounds. My friend kept insisting I look out the tent flap to make sure he wasn't crazy. So I peered cautiously through the flap, trying to spot anything unusual in the darkness. At this point, I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was racing, and I felt terrible. But I had to look outside. I slowly peeked out the tent flap and waited for my eyes to adjust. That's when I saw him. He was standing only a few feet away from the tent, swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it really creepy was that he was wearing women's clothes. That's when I realized something was really wrong with this guy. After I pulled my head back into the tent, my friend and I talked about what to do. Finally, we decided to shout at him to leave. My friend started yelling, "Excuse me, can you leave? We're trying to sleep here." The noise stopped, and it was dead silent. Then we heard footsteps running towards our tent. They stopped right outside, but we didn't waste any time. We started shouting again, "Seriously, go away. We have cell phones in here, and if you don't leave, we'll call the police." Then, we heard him walk away from the tent, his footsteps fading as he headed towards the road. We stayed awake, terrified, listening to every little sound in the darkness, unable to sleep until the first light of morning. As soon as the sun started to rise, we hurried to pack up our gear. On the way home, we talked about what happened. It definitely wasn't very brave of either of us. We were both so embarrassed about how much a stranger freaked us out that we haven't talked about it since that day. Years ago, when my boyfriend and I were still new to dating, my sister suggested we try a snorkeling trip together. She told us about a quarry surrounded by a campground filled with clear blue water. It's well known for its beautiful, crystal clear water and is a popular spot for diving and snorkeling. We thought it sounded like a fun adventure and decided to give it a try. Some people even said there's a helicopter and a school bus underwater that you can dive down to see. My boyfriend and I decided to camp there for the night. At first, we had a great time. We snorkeled in the shallow part of the quarry, and even though the water was a bit deep and strange, I was still having fun. The water is around 65 feet deep, so when we swam past the shallow area, it quickly dropped off into pitch black depths. That's when I realized I have a strong fear of deep water. Besides the frightening darkness, there's something really creepy about the lake. It's completely still. Since it's a quarry, the water doesn't have any current, making it feel even more weird. Once we finished snorkeling, my boyfriend and I went back to our campsite to relax and unwind for the night. We were camping on a grassy spot down a hill from the road. Our tent was set up in a wooded area that extended from our campsite. Across the grass was another campsite that looked well used, but our neighbors were not there at the time. We were cooking hot dogs over the fire when our neighbors finally came back. It was already nighttime, and they went straight to sleep. My boyfriend and I were chatting around the campfire when we noticed a dark figure standing up the hill, watching us. The shadows from the fire made it hard to see details, but it was clear he was staring directly at us. He stood there for what felt like forever, just watching us. Eventually, he started walking down the road, moving slowly and disappearing behind the trees. We stayed completely silent, keeping our eyes on him as he walked away. The trees were connected to our campsite and also stood between us and him. I couldn't tell if he was still behind a tree or if he had disappeared. I was really freaked out, wondering where he went. I saw my boyfriend looking the same way, confused, but he shrugged it off and I naively did too. We ended up forgetting about the figure and decided to check out the quarry late at night. The stars reflecting on the water were amazing, and it was really peaceful, but the deep black water was still pretty terrifying. When we got back to our campsite, we crawled into our tent. As we relaxed, I started to feel uneasy. Even though I was trying to brush it off, the feeling didn't go away. I kept thinking about the creepy figure from earlier. After we sat in silence for a while, my boyfriend suddenly asked, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" I said, "Why would you say that?" My boyfriend decided he wanted to get out of the tent, so we moved to stand by my car. I came up with a strange idea that being out in the open field, right in the middle of the campground, might be the safest place. I thought that if someone was coming towards us, we'd have a better chance of seeing them from there. We were standing in the middle of the field when we saw a shadowy figure that looked similar to the one we'd seen earlier. He was about 20 yards away. We both noticed him as we walked, and he started walking in the same direction as us. We changed our direction, and he did also. So, we agreed that if we changed direction again and he followed us, we'd head straight back to my car. We turned a different way, and just as we expected, he followed us again. We didn't waste any time and ran back to the car. From inside the car, I watched him slowly walk back into the darkness, still staring at us. My boyfriend then said, "Let's get out of here." I agreed, but all our camping gear was still outside. We quietly gathered our things, trying not to scare each other. The strangest part of the story comes next, in my opinion. Now, my headlights weren't working, and there was a strange fog on the windshield that wouldn't go away, no matter what we tried. We had to drive out of the woods using only the low beams, and the fog made it really hard to see. We somehow managed to get out, but the fog disappeared right when we got to the gas station. We got home around 1 a.m. I told my dad the story the next day, and he said he was glad we got out of there, as things could have turned out really badly. My boyfriend and I think the shadowy figure we saw was either someone trying to harm us, or maybe a Wendigo. We've sort of decided it might have been a Wendigo because what happened was so hard to explain. 2 years ago, something happened to my girlfriend and me when we were in our late 20s. We decided to go camping for the weekend and chose the Barlow National Forest near Cedar Ridge, Oregon. The place was beautiful, with tall trees all around, and we were excited to spend the night under the stars. Even now, when I think about that night, it still gives me chills and makes my heart race. We were only about 15 minutes away from the main road, but it felt really isolated. There were just dirt roads and trees all around us. We got there in the early afternoon and set up our camp in a nice open area on top of a hill next to the road. During the few hours between when we arrived and when it got dark, we saw only about 4 cars go by. They were all hunters leaving the forest. By 7 p.m., the sun was mostly down, and it was getting dark. The quiet and calm of the woods were nice, but it felt a bit strange being so isolated. I've been camping maybe 50 times before, but I've always been with a larger group or at a designated campsite. After we finished dinner, which we cooked over the campfire, we hung our food in a bear bag to keep it safe from animals. Once it was completely dark, we relaxed on a blanket and gazed up at the stars. The night sky was clear, and we could see countless stars twinkling above us. I was feeling good, and had almost forgotten that we were alone in the middle of the forest. We went into the tent and sat in the dark, talking for at least an hour. I'm a tall guy, but the tent is high enough that I can sit up inside it easily. The rainfly was just lying on top of the tent. It covered one side completely, but it wasn't attached or staked down. We had a clear view through the mesh sides, and the trees outside were only faintly lit by the moon. Here's where things got creepy. I had been reading a lot about supernatural activity and decided to tell my girlfriend about a ritual. You sit in a dark room at 3 a.m., set up a candle and 2 mirrors, and through some mix of unknown forces and being really tired, you might see images in the mirrors that seem to talk to you. I was having fun scaring her, and to be honest, I was scaring myself a little too. Just thinking about it now gives me chills. The woods were completely silent, and there wasn't even a hint of wind. There was no rustling or movement in the air at all. I paused my story, and while I did, the rainfly started to slowly pull back from the top of the tent. It didn't fall off or get blown away. Honestly, it felt like someone was carefully pulling it down from behind us. I'll never forget the sound it made. We turned and looked at each other, both wide-eyed, and my heart felt like it was in my throat. The rainfly kept sliding slowly down the tent until it was completely off. It was too dark to see anything clearly behind us, but my mind was racing with all the scary creatures I'd seen in horror movies. I'd like to say I sprang into action to make sure we were safe, but I was frozen in place. It was a terrifying feeling. We sat there in shock for about 10 seconds until I finally managed to grab my flashlight and check behind us. But there was nothing. We both let out a huge sigh and started whispering excitedly. "What the heck was that?" Then I got out and looked all around the clearing, but after a while I felt silly, and we decided to go to sleep. The next morning we woke up early and packed up our camp. It was sunny and quiet, but I still couldn't shake the creepy feeling from the night before. While I was on my knees rolling up the tent, I kept glancing around at the trees. My girlfriend was packing up breakfast about 30 feet in front of me. Again, there was absolutely nobody around, no birds chirping, no animals in sight. Then, from directly behind me, I suddenly heard 2 quick, loud thuds. The sound was like an axe hitting a tree, and it happened about 2 seconds apart. I'd say it came from within 100 feet of where I was. My girlfriend jumped up as I quickly turned around to look, but there was nothing there. We both said, "Okay, time to get out of here," and left in a hurry. We safely reached our home, and only then did we start to feel a bit calmer. As we reflected on everything that happened, we wondered if it could have all been just our imagination. Being in such an isolated place with the dark woods surrounding us, it's possible our minds were playing tricks on us.